this email chain and chain of events really explains some of this as well. In April of 2014, Hunter wrote an email to Archer. The announcement of my guy, who he seems to refer to as his father in many of these exchanges, of his upcoming travel should be characterized as part of our advice and thinking, but what he will say and do is out of our hands. Then 2 days later, the vice president meets with Hunter and Archer at the White House. A few days later, on the 21st, he goes to Ukraine, and we all remember what happened there when he basically said, you know, we're going to get rid of this guy, Shokin, who was investigating Burisma. And then shortly after that, April 22nd and May 12th, Burisma decides to bring both Archer and Hunter onto the board at $83,000 each a month.
Yes. So you have Zlochevsky, who is the head of Burisma.
Right.
And then Obama appoints a fellow named Jeffrey Pyatt to be the American ambassador to Ukraine. He gives a speech in Odessa, Ukraine, talking about corruption, because it's rampant in Ukraine, as we know. And he said, one of the poster children is Zlochevsky, right? And then Viktor Shokin, who was the prosecutor, seizes 4 homes of Zlochevsky, 2 plots of land and a Rolls Royce. But Joe Biden goes to Ukraine and says, you have to fire Viktor Shokin, who's investigating the guy that runs my son, basically my son's company. He's on the board. That in and of itself smacks of corruption. And I'm going to withhold $1 billion worth of aid unless you fire Viktor Shokin, which they did. And then he released $1 billion of aid. Now you couple that with reading the FBI 1023 report about the very reliable confidential informant who says Zlochevsky called him and said, don't worry, all this investigation on me will go away because Hunter Biden is on my board. If you take that at face value, and I do because the FBI themselves have said the 1023 was from a highly reliable informant that has always checked out all the information he's ever given us is checked out, and we've been working with him for 10 years, and we've given him hundreds of thousands of dollars for that information. So you tell me, what does that sound like?
You know, and I always think of it also in terms of the first kind of bite at this apple, which was Tony Bobulinski, who came forward and just said, you know, yeah, he was there. I met him several times in these exchanges. And let me ask you one last question, and you tell me, you know, if I'm putting this together correctly. So U.S. aid is obviously funded by U.S. taxpayers. Mm-hmm. So the vice president goes to Ukraine and says, I'm going to withhold this aid, right, which Congress has approved, right, to go to Ukraine, to spend U.S. taxpayer dollars for this purpose. If you can show a link, and I know the Oversight Committee is putting all of this together, that says that he made a decision based not on what had been appropriated by Congress, but on pressure that was coming towards him from his son as an international lobbyist and his colleagues. You know, is that potentially a violation of law?
There's so many potential violations of law because, as you just said, Congress appropriated that money, and he was saying basically when you withhold, he's dragging his feet. Interestingly enough, Tony Bobulinski, Tony called Joe Biden the big guy, but so did Zlochevsky. Zlochevsky in the 1023 called him the big guy. I think that's a bit too coincidental not to be accurate.
Yeah.